First question, what is it? Second question, is there anything that causes it or reasons why gender dysphoria occurs? 3, is it common, and is it more common in men or women? Also, is it common in children? Or is it more common in children than adults? That's an interesting question. Also, why is it so difficult to diagnose children with gender dysphoria? Also, is there any treatment for gender dysphoria? If so, what are the treatments? And the big question, is it really considered a mental disorder? Alright, so let's get this on the road. Gender identity disorder, according to the DSM-5, is now known officially as gender dysphoria. There are a variety of criteria that needs to be met in order to correctly diagnose this to children and adults. It is broken down into 2 parts. These criteria need to be in place and visible to adults and other members of the family for a period of 6 months or longer, and they need to be absolutely sure that they want to be the other gender. Into 2 parts, and I will read off the first diagnosis criteria for children. Now, children only need to meet 6 out of the 8 criteria according to the DSM-5 to be considered eligible for this disorder. Let me read them off to you.
The first one is a strong desire to be the other gender, or they insist on being the other gender. The second is boys and girls considered to cross-dress. Third, strong desire to be the opposite gender roles in fantasy imaginative play. The fourth is a strong desire to play with opposing genders' stereotypical toys, such as trucks or Barbie dolls. 5 is a strong desire to associate with the playmates of the opposite gender, so boys would like to play more with girls than play with boys. Girls would prefer to play with boys more than girls. 6 is the boys' rejection of masculine activities, games, and rough tumble play, while girls reject feminine activities such as nail painting and games such as like Pretty Princess. 7, strong distaste for one's sexual anatomy, which they do not like their body or the genital parts that they're born with. 8 is the strong desire for primary, secondary sex traits of the other gender, such as little girl wanting a mustache or a beard.
Now I'm going to the adult criteria. Now, adults only need to meet 2 out of the 6 DSM-5 criteria in order to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Now, the same applies to adults as children. It needs to be prominent for 6 months or more. It needs to be acknowledged by other people between their desired gender and their natural gender.
Is as followed. Expresses oneself as desired gender instead of natal gender, or natural gender. The strong desire to remove natural, primary, and secondary sex traits due to an experience within expressing the opposing gender. So, they want the removal of their genital parts or primary sex traits because something had happened while they were their natural gender. So they don't want them anymore. The third trait is a strong desire to have the primary and secondary sex traits of the opposing gender. 4 is the strong desire to be the other gender. 5 is the strong desire to be treated as the other gender, socially and mentally and physically. 6 is the strong belief that they have the typical thoughts, feelings, and reactions of the opposing gender.
2, what does it mean to be gender dysphoric? So there's 3 main points as to what this exactly means. The first one is, in basic terms, one would rather live as their opposing gender, such as a man desiring to be a woman or a woman deciding to live as a man. There's also no sexual gratification in the decision, it's just they simply want to live as the other gender. And the third is gender dysphoria needs to be distinguished from homosexual attractions and sexual arousal patterns. The point is, are there any causes to gender dysphoria? Now, I got this research from our book of the Essentials of Abnormal Psychology, and I've came up with 4 main points. Now, according to Coolidge, Thede, and Young, they discovered that genetics could create a vulnerable point during the essential developmental stages through the embryonic stage and puberty and adolescent stages. In twins, is according to Keefe from 2002. He says elevated levels of testosterone or estrogen in a baby or developing fetus could contribute to gender dysphoria. He's saying that, hey, she has higher levels of testosterone, she's going to end up with gender dysphoria and want to be a man. But if he has higher levels of estrogen, he's going to grow up and want to desire to be a woman. Now, of course, all of these are hypothetical, biological elements, because we haven't gotten that far in developmental science and methods and all that happy research method writing to conclude these as concrete evidence. So, moving on to 3, these guys discovered the evidence that makes the hypothesis of a gender identity solidifies between the ages of 18 months and 3 years. Oh, I'm blocking my little baby. There we are. And so they've come up with the conclusion that the choice or the decision of being gender dysphoric happens between these period of time. You're really young. So maybe, this children developing gender dysphoria has some weight. All right, and the last one is from these guys. And they concluded that environmental changes have an impact on gender dysphoria. So now we're on to how common is gender dysphoria. Now, I provided you with the stats right on the card, however, I'm going to read them to you also. So gender dysphoria, while rejecting the natural sex, is rather rare. In a sample of 100,000 men, only 1.5 through 5% are gender dysphoric. And with females, only between 2 to 3 females per 100,000 females are also gender dysphoric. Now, the crazy part is, I feel that this is rather interesting, and I didn't expect this. I figured this would be more prominent in females than males. But 3 times the amount of men would like to be gender dysphoric than women. Isn't that kind of cool? And why is it so difficult to diagnose children with this disorder? Well, according to some Canadian psychological research, it brings up the evidence that gender dysphoria seems to be more common in children than adults. However, children who grow up being gender dysphoric don't necessarily develop into gender dysphoric adults. Now, this becomes the idea that it's just a phase, most children grow out of it. However, there is a small percentage of children who do grow up being gender dysphoric as adults. Also, it is often overlooked by parents because they don't want to admit that their child is transgender or gender dysphoric. It's just often overlooked until children become adamant and persistent about things like name changes and cross-dressing in public. It's just how this child wants to be. Let him be. So there's the treatment methods for gender dysphoria. Are there any? Let's find out. For children, there are 4 stages. There's conditioning, watchful waiting, full support and acceptance, or hormonal blockers. Now, the first one about conditioning brings up a great point. Now, it's controversial in today's society for children to even be gender dysphoric. Now, ways to treat gender dysphoria in children? That's a whole nother level of controversy. An option is conditioning. Now, this is when you condition a child out of being gender dysphoric. It's not always the best option, in my opinion, just because it creates more emotional turmoil for the child. It has more issues with developing into who they want to be. In the NPR segments, the family who was exampled for this condition part was under the name of Bradley. Bradley wanted to be a little girl. Now, there were adamant things that he was doing, like wearing towel hair from a previous costume. He was Dorothy for Halloween, and he became attached to these ideas of having girly things like hair and characters, and he related the best to the girly people. However, his parents didn't like that. So he brought him to a psychologist under the name of Zucker. Zucker has now been a psychologist for more than 30 years and believes that this is the best idea to kick gender dysphoric kids out of this habit. So he decided to tell the family that take everything out of the home that involves girl anything. So that's what they did. No more toys, no more character play, nothing. So he ended up hiding toys to try to keep his gender opposing, desire in his life, and his mom kept finding these toys and hidden in the couch, and that wasn't good. So he ended up going to drawing and coloring, and he only drew girl things. Now, one day she asked him, "Hey, can you draw a boy for me?" And he told her, "I don't know how." He doesn't know how to socialize with girls or boys, but after more consecutive coercive therapy, he ended up making more male friends, and he was happy with being a boy. Now, it brought more emotional turmoil to the child. He had a lot of time adjusting. He didn't want to attend school, but he still found ways to play with girl toys in the beginning. But after some time, he learned to adjust to it. The second treatment option is watchful waiting. Now, this is when the child expresses the desire for the other gender, but on his or her own, and caregivers, parents, and other authority in the child's life will need to support the child in case of a lack of social integration or humiliation. But they're not really prominent in any other part of the association. Third option is to fully support your child. Now, the example given in the NPR videos was for Jonah. He was a transgender child who wanted to be a little girl from a little boy. Now, he had a lot of time adjusting too, as well. His family wasn't too happy about the idea. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to advocate for him. So they started little things, like they were accepting that his stuffed animals and toys were girls. He was more attracted to female characters and female peers, and he hated when his parents corrected him, because there were instances where they were walking and, people thought he was a little girl, and he got happy, and then his dad was like, "No, that's my son." And then he ended up talking out and speaking out. "Why do you always do that? Why do you always tell them I'm a boy?" So after this outburst from Jonah, they decided to try to step up their game and try to help him out a little better. So they ended up buying him dresses, and they ended up bringing him to a therapist as well. Now, the therapist said that they didn't like Zucker's idea of conditioning children out of gender dysphoria. They wanted them to be who they wanted to be. So their therapist, Diana Aronsoft, told them that if he's happy of being a girl and happy of who he is, if he's not depressed or anxious, don't bring him to therapy. Don't put them in therapy if they don't need to be. So that was her method, and from then on, that they conditioned their child in a good way to help him express himself and help him, give him the best idea of comfort that he knows how to be a little girl. And eventually, Joan changed his name to Violet, and the family accepted the fact that he was a transgender girl. Treatment for children is hormonal blockers. Now, this is when the child takes medicine for a majority of their life before puberty, so that way that they can stop puberty, so they don't become a male or female further than their birth genitals. Now, in the NPR discussion on the second one, they ended up having a little boy who wanted to grow up as a little girl. So what they did was they went to a physician for this, and there was conflict because, however, it is a good idea. It's a constant flux. Feelings are always changing, and if you do this, it won't reverse the process. It'll just slow the development a lot more. And if they already take it through puberty, then they're going to end up getting their stages of puberty as an adult. That's going to make things difficult. If they're fully confident in their decision and they go on to their adolescent and they want to take more testosterone or estrogen, they will end up not being fertile, or they'll be sterile for the rest of their lives. 2 criteria for adult treatment options. The first one is a sex reassignment surgery. This is the sex procedure. It's a surgical procedure to change the primary sexual characteristics to their desired gender to complete one's gender identity vision. There are some criteria that needs to be met. First, you need to be gender dysphoric fully for 1 to 2 years just to be sure that you want the surgery. And secondly, you need to be psychologically, financially, and socially stable to make this change. For trans women, so men becoming women, hormones are provided for breast development, facial hair is removed, and if all goes well, a vagina is made and implanted. For trans men, women becoming men, artificial penises are created through plastic surgery, and breasts are surgically removed. At least for the option for adult treatment is the intersexuality or the treatment of disorders of sex development. Now, this is when at birth a individual is born with both female and male genitalia, and the doctor chooses either for them to be a male or a female. Now, this causes, it's often reversible, so it's hard to do as an adult. So doctors want to start to examine more precisely of the disorder of the sex development only as a last resort option. So changing that gender, for them as a last resort option, and only if it will lead to that direct change in the psychological viewpoint of gender identity. So they want to be able to, they can make this decision and avoid the consequence later on in life of the individual wanting to either be a male or a female depending on what the doctor chose as genitalia for them. Final question, I apologize for the time, but should gender dysphoria be considered a mental disorder? Why or why not? Now, according to the Merriam Dictionary, a mental disorder is a mental or bodily condition marked primarily by sufficient disorganization of personality, mind, and emotions to seriously impair the normal psychological functioning of an individual, also called mental illness. Now, I personally don't agree with that. Of course, that is the definition given in the dictionary, but gender dysphoria should not be considered a mental disorder. These children clearly, and adults, clearly know what they want in their lives. They want to be the opposing gender. They feel like they're stuck in their male bodies or their female bodies, and they do not want to be a part of it. People with mental disorders cognitively could not make that decision, or they would need to be put on medication for making this decision. I mean, for some instances, the hormonal blockers, yes, but I feel like this is a straight-out decision that one should be able to make and not be considered labeled or considered having a mental disorder. I think that's ridiculous. Children who want to grow up being a little girl, that's a change. That's something they enjoy doing. I don't see why you should suppress children or adults from making this change. It's just like choosing to be gay or choosing to be a lesbian or a gay man. I don't think it has the same weight that a mental disorder like schizophrenia has, or, OCD or panic disorder. It doesn't fit in those categories of mental disorders. That's my project on gender dysphoria. I apologize for the longer time constraint, even with cutting things out. It was really difficult to make so far. I hope you enjoyed my video, and I apologize again. Thank you.